These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism has understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant recklessness, beyond the self-hatred.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Wow, there's so much going on in the world. Welcome to the program today. In our third hour, Jake Johnston is going to drop by talking about what's going on in Haiti. And they don't need another president chosen in secret. Haiti is like disaster upon disaster. We'll get to that in the third hour of our program today. In our second hour of the program, I want to dig into why the Biden administration has banned a pesticide that the Trump administration said, oh, just fine, it only causes brain damage to children. And Professor Wolff will be with us, Richard Wolff, about the deficit and the debt and why we should or should not care about these things. And I'm going to get into my daily rant today over at HartmannReport.com. Medicare-For-All will stop boss men like Ron DeSantis from playing games with deadly diseases for political gain. I'll get into that in about 10 minutes. But I wanted to start out with, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Afghanistan. This has the situation continues to be a cluster as the American media rightly continues to focus on the fact that Donald Trump cut this deal about a year ago with the Taliban, guaranteeing them that by May 1st, there would be no more Americans in Afghanistan. And, basically surrendered the entire country to the Taliban, closed 10 Air Force bases, basically neutered our ability to do a rational withdrawal, and then just basically sat on it, particularly after the election, after he lost the election in November, for another 2 months. It refused to allow the Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration, to even get security briefings from the Pentagon on what was going on. So when the Biden administration came into power on the 20th or the 21st of January, really the 21st was their first full day, they were just beginning the process of looking around going, what's going on here? Now, that said, that was, what, 7 months ago? And they, frankly, should have gotten a hell of a lot more people out before the withdrawal. Now, you know, the Biden administration moved it back from May to August. But, you know, I think that I think it's appropriate that there be some criticism directed at them, and they're taking a lot of incoming fire on this, and it looks like they're trying to make it right, but it may be too late. And there's going to be thousands of people. And then, of course, as I pointed out yesterday, over here in the United States, now we have Fox News, you know, being led by Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson, going all hysterical about the possibility that tens of thousands or maybe even 100,000 brown people from Afghanistan might become immigrants to the United States. Oh, my God! Over on the right-wing sites, my newsletter today from thewriting.com, the NOQ report, the headline, Kamala is quietly shopping the cabinet for the 25th Amendment. Right? You know, there was a serious discussion about this around Donald Trump when he would just like go off the rails. But, you know, anyhow, the Washington Times, the headline, it's time to impeach Biden. The Daily Signal, America is experiencing a crisis of confidence in Biden. The Rasmussen Reports, which is a polling organization, their headline, and this is really grim news, and it's why I think that we need to keep pointing out, Donald Trump set up this disaster. Yes, the Biden administration could have handled the withdrawal better, but there was the Trump administration that set this thing up. That's why the Afghan military vanished, was because of the deal that Trump cut with the Taliban, with the leader of the Taliban that he had ordered out of prison. But anyhow, the headline over at Rasmussen Reports, voters blame Biden, not Trump, for Taliban takeover. So that's, you know, the right-wing spin on all this. And then we get former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. She was our ambassador to the United Nations, I believe, during the time that Donald Trump was negotiating and Mike Pompeo were negotiating this deal with the Taliban. When they walked up to, you know, they went to Pakistan first of all and said, let out of prison the head of the Taliban, this mullah, let him out, and then they negotiated directly with him and said, we surrender. We're going to leave Afghanistan. We're going to give you everything. Trump closed down 10 Air Force bases. And you know, the Taliban was like, cool, thank you for the planes. Thank you for the military equipment. Thank you for the repair equipment. Thank you for these nice airports that you built. So then Nikki Haley, who was our UN ambassador, tweets yesterday, to have our generals say they are depending on diplomacy with the Taliban is an unbelievable scenario. Negotiating with the Taliban is like dealing with the devil. Oh, really, Nikki? You know, somebody replied saying, how stupid do you have to be to tweet something like this? It's just, actually, that's from an article over at crooksandliars.com. Fred Wellman replies with a tweet. By the way, a great thread about this by Babylon's sister over at DU. Fred Wellman responds with a tweet. You do know we all saw you at the UN working for Trump, right? Do you think we're going to magically forget your administration did, in fact, negotiate with the Taliban and released 5,000 prisoners while drawing down our forces? Jeff Tiedrich replied to Nikki Haley, cool story, Nix. Just curious, when Trump was arranging for 5,000 Taliban warriors to be released from prison, was that a negotiation? Or did he just skip to the end and say yes without getting anything in return? Which is a really interesting point. John Ratcliffe, who was Donald Trump's national security advisor at the time, went on Fox News yesterday and said that Donald Trump, he said, quote, and I remember President Trump saying, I don't think they'll last 2 days, speaking of the Afghan military. In other words, Trump knew how this was going to play out and was fine with it. Ratcliffe says, we had that intelligence when I was Director of National Intelligence, when I was DNI. They knew this was going to go down this way, Donald Trump. They knew it. I mean, it was obvious. I mean, when you negotiate a surrender, which is what Donald Trump did, how do you think it's going to play out? And it was already a done deal when Biden came into office. Trump had already closed 10 Air Force bases. He had already turned over most of Afghanistan to the Taliban. Pretty much all that hadn't fallen was Kabul. And who was making all these negotiations happen? Well, the point man was Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, the former, cokehead congressman from Kansas, who now wants to be the senator from Kansas, or maybe the governor of Kansas. I think he's running for senator. And this, a brilliant piece by Alex Henderson over at alternate.org, scathing Kansas City editorial slams disingenuous partisan Mike Pompeo for total hypocrisy over Afghanistan. This is the Kansas City Star editorial board wrote yesterday, quote, Pompeo personally oversaw the Trump administration's Afghanistan withdrawal discussions with Taliban co-founder Abdul Ghani Baradar, whom the CIA had arrested in 2010. He'd been in a Pakistani prison until Trump got him out 2 years ago. So it's a little bit stunning to watch Pompeo accuse Biden of leading by weakness by finishing the troop withdrawal that Trump planned to accomplish even more quickly. Pompeo, they note, however, is blaming Biden, or this is Alex Henderson, is blaming Biden for embracing Trump-era policy that he aggressively promoted. And the lead newspaper in Pompeo's own state, where Pompeo is trying to build his political future, is having none of it. And a fine thing it is. There's plenty of blame to go around. But let's look at first causes. George W. Bush could have negotiated the arrest of bin Laden. Instead, he wanted to have a war to get reelected. And Donald Trump then ended the war by surrendering. That's what happened.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm just so over it with presidents lying us into wars and then the disasters that follow. And welcome back. Pete in San Bernardino, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Pete, what's on your mind today?
Tom, wasn't there a connection between Afghanistan and the opium poppies?
Oh, yeah.
Pharmaceuticals?
It is selling opium is the major source of revenue for the Taliban, has been forever.
That's what I thought.
The single largest source of income. In fact, there was a fascinating report on CNN this morning about how the Kabul government, or the official Afghan government, which has fallen now, was receiving 80% of their funding from the United States, and people are saying, oh, well, the Taliban is screwed because the U.S. is no longer passing that money along. And then, this analyst comes along and says, no, the Taliban's doing just fine, thank you very much. They've got a lucrative opium poppy production and, opium sale business. And on top of that, they're running extortion and kidnapping, for money operations, like the one I saw when I was in Bogota, Colombia, back 20 years ago. So
yeah,
that's what's going on.
So thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
I wanted to remind people of that connection.
Yeah, well, you did a great job of that.
The pharmaceutical company that's being sued right now for all the deaths that they've caused. What pharmaceutical company is that?
It's the Sackler family. The company was Purdue Pharma.
Right.
Yeah.
Pharma. But what's the company name?
Purdue Pharma. So, Pete, thanks a lot for the call. Frank in Thompson Falls, Montana. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind?
You've pretty much covered everything that I was going to say, except for the fact that the head of the Afghani government took $169 million and fled to Abu Dhabi.
Literally an airplane packed filled with $100 bills. It was literally packed with cash.
Yesterday, there was a soldier that was on Stephanie Miller that said that they were on the tarmac and the Afghani soldiers couldn't even get water because the Afghani government wasn't paying them and wouldn't give them any supplies, so the American soldiers were giving them some of their water. So what are you supposed to do as far as fighting back if you don't have any supplies or any income?
Right. Yeah, and this is all the stuff that Donald Trump negotiated and put into place and Joe Biden inherited. Although, again, I mean, I just want to qualify that by saying he should have started getting our people out in February. I mean, he took power and he took office in January. Within a few weeks, they should have started getting people out of that country. And I don't think it would have led to a stampede. And
another question.
Go ahead.
Another question I have is, I know that why it's happening, but why can't we get corporate media to take and talk about all the things that you were talking about, what they did to lead up to this debacle, and, the president closing down all the air bases and stuff like that? All they want to do is play the blame game and blame it on Biden.
They're doing what the media always does. If it bleeds, it leads. If you've got a gory picture, you run with it. It doesn't matter where it came from. It doesn't matter the history. It's like this is the shiny object right now, and the shiny object is people, hanging on to wheel wells of airplanes as they're trying to take off. The more they can show the desperation, the better, it looks for their ratings or whatever. It's very unfortunate, Frank, and it's a sad commentary on the state of our media right now. Frank, thanks a lot for calling. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. I'll be back in 1 minute. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at thomhartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Oh, my. Okay, so Afghanistan. I think that it's really important that we understand what happened here. George W. Bush lied us into a war. Donald Trump surrendered to the Taliban, released the Taliban commander, released 5,000 of their most vigorous fighters, put them back into the base, turned over 10 of our Air Force bases to them, and basically walked away from it, telling his director of national intelligence that the government would fall within 2 days. But it wasn't going to happen when he was president. He was going to hand this whole mess off to Joe Biden. Prepackaged. Here, Joe, it's a nice little birthday cake. Just ignore that ticking sound. Topic 1. Topic 2, what's going on in Florida? I mean, this is just crazy what's going on down in Florida. The Miami-Dade School Board just yesterday afternoon decided to defy Governor DeSantis, excuse me. They are going to have a mask mandate for the start of this year because the parents want it. Now, yeah, they had a bunch of crazy asshats show up there, too, with their pre-printed signs. It looks like Betsy DeVos and some of her people are in on this, We had this person from the International Women's Forum on yesterday talking about how important it is not to mask children in school. And I'm like, is this part of the plan to destroy our public school system? And then I was reading this piece over on Daily Kos yesterday about how Betsy DeVos and some of her billionaire buddies who hate public schools are like jumping in with 2 feet. I don't know if there's a connection between the two. If IWF is in this, or if this is just all over the right wingosphere, right? But hey, let's infect our teachers. Ron DeSantis is playing political games with a deadly virus. The Miami-Dade mayor, Daniela Levine Cava, said praised this school board decision, said protecting our children must be our top priority. I applaud the Miami-Dade school board for following the science and putting the health and well-being of our children first. It was a 7-1 vote as people were chanting, unmask our kids, unmask our kids. A medical task force that the school district, the Miami-Dade school district had employed, unanimously recommended a mask mandate, unanimously. And new polling from Ipsos Axios shows 69% of Americans support in-school mask mandates. My point in my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com, Medicare-For-All will stop boss men from playing political games with deadly diseases for political gain. The point of that is that when you look at those countries that have national health care systems where everybody's in, everybody's protected, the country isn't overrun by disease, or when it is, people don't go bankrupt. They can get help. You don't have politicians playing these kind of political games that DeSantis and Abbott are playing. Because you have a central voice. I mean, the closest we've got to this right now is Fauci, right? Or the CDC. Fauci's not with the CDC. He's with the, National Institutes of Health, but it's a subdivision that has to do with the, infectious diseases. In any case, a national healthcare system, like every other developed country in the world has, sort of with the exception of Switzerland, a national healthcare system gives a voice, a national voice to healthcare, and make sure that America would stop having bankruptcies. We've gone from 500,000 bankruptcies to 700,000 last year. We're probably going to hit 1 million this year, all because of COVID. Not all because of COVID, but about half of them because of COVID. This is a disaster. If there was ever an argument for Medicare for all, that argument is what's going on right now. When everybody is protected with health insurance and health care, when everybody is protected, then you have a public health system as well as an individual health system. When you've got, when you rely on for-profit corporations to provide health insurance to people, and they skim so much money off the top that people like Dollar Bill McGuire, the former CEO of United Healthcare, can literally walk away with more than $1 billion. His successor, Stephen J. Hemsley, walking away with hundreds of millions of dollars. When you've got a system like that, you end up with massive numbers of people who are underinsured or uninsured. And this is why this Family USA study found roughly 1 out of every 3 COVID deaths are linked to health insurance gaps. Nearly more than 40% of all COVID infections are associated with health insurance gaps. By February 2021, 10.9 million infections and 143,000 deaths were associated with health insurance gaps. This is not happening in Canada. This is not happening in the United Kingdom. It's not happening in France or in Germany or in Spain or in Italy or in Denmark or Norway or Sweden or Finland. It's only happening here. It's time for Medicare for All, as I lay out in my new book, The Hidden History of American Healthcare.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Which, by the way, is a great toolkit for Medicare for All activists. That's why I wrote it. Pick up your phone calls after the break here. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one, too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare-For-All types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare-For-All would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's this one's a geeky science one. And it's about this little snippet of genetic material, what's called microRNA. And the name of this one is called MIR1, M-I-R-1. And we've known for years that when muscles are used, I'm talking about, exercise to the point where you feel fatigue in your muscles, that when when muscles are exercised, it depletes them of MIR1. What they didn't know is where that MIR1 goes and what it does. And it turns out that our fat cells draw the MIR1 in from the muscles, and it causes the fat cells to start converting themselves into fatty acids that can be used to feed the muscles. So we're not just building muscle, but we're also reducing fat in our body. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going into depth on it in this new video. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Lynn in Kansas City, Kansas. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I wondered if you watched Lawrence O'Donnell Tuesday night.
I did not.
He seemed to, you need to go back and watch it. He really explained and gave a completely different viewpoint than all the other pundits out there. First of all, Biden started asking people, the Americans, to leave in February, offered to pay their tickets to get them out of there. And most of them refused to leave. Didn't want to go yet. Wanted to see how things were going to work out.
Was
and
this,
also,
is this
it wouldn't have
contractors or
mattered.
people who were like working for aid organizations or what?
The embassy and contractors, yes.
Huh.
And various organizations, help,
So if the contractors didn't leave, why didn't he cut off their contracts?
Yeah.
Stop the money.
I'm just saying there's all kinds of more going on than just Biden's a screw up.
Yeah, no, I get that.
I am so tired of everybody bashing Biden here. And Lawrence put a good argument out on it doesn't matter if we started to leave February or August, the exact same thing was going to happen.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
It didn't matter when any of this started. It was going to go the way it's going.
And
so
whether
Biden isn't dragging his feet or screwing up or anything else. It's how it goes. It's how occupying a country and then leaving goes.
I think that's a good point, Lynn, and it's I'll try to make it more often. The simple reality is that we're drawing arbitrary lines. There's an estimated 2 million people in Afghanistan who in one way or another have worked with, collaborated with, or interacted with the American military over the last 20 years. And
they're not all making it out.
And there's about 80,000 who have been direct employees of the United States government. The rest of that, going up to the 2 million were people who were working peripherally with contractors or, whatever, local businesses that were supplying food and things. So where do you draw the line? How, the Taliban's going to go after as many of those people as they can. And how do you get them out and how do you identify them? And the Biden administration back in February started this plan with these special visas, these SID visas, I think they're called, and and trying to identify people and getting them out. But the State Department was running really like molasses on this, and
yeah, because it was depleted.
Well, and it's complex.
Administration.
And the main thing is that most of the people applying for these waivers, for these visa waivers, had to demonstrate that they had actually worked for a U.S. contractor. And a lot of these contractors were phony baloney companies that were created by wealthy defense contractors. They would set up a shell corporation essentially, so that if there was any liability, if their workers committed war crimes or atrocities or things, they could simply bankrupt the corporation and walk away with the profits. And that's exactly what happened. There's all kinds of defense companies, so-called defense contractors, that were created during those 20 years that literally went out of business in the last 6 months. And so there was nobody for these people in Afghanistan, these Afghan citizens who had worked with these contractors. There was nobody for them to contact to prove that they had actually worked for an American contractor, because the contractor didn't exist anymore. And a lot of the other contractors, these big defense contractors, were just taking their sweet time providing any kind of documentation. And so, you've got this absolute cluster. I mean, it's totally predictable. And there is no easy answer here, Lynn, and other than don't go into countries in the first place, number one. Or number two, if you are going to declare a war on a country, George W. Bush had his war on Afghanistan. It lasted 3.5 weeks, and then the government fell. If you're going to declare war on a country, after the government falls, declare your mission accomplished and get the hell out and help the country rebuild itself, basically like we did with Germany and Japan. Now, I realize we still have troops in both those countries, but they're not there to police Germany or Japan. In both cases, we're there as allied troops to project force into the region, which is a completely different thing. And very few people are talking about this, in these terms. And that kind of analysis just largely doesn't even exist in the mainstream media. How badly George W. Bush screwed this up in the first 7 years, and then obviously what Trump did, cutting his deal with the Taliban. It's just terrible. Lynn, thank you for the call, and thank you for pointing that out. I'll have to go back and see what Lawrence had to say. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
That old expression about when life gives you lemons, make lemonade?
Right.
Well, if you think about it, we have a great opportunity to avoid a super spreader, help rebuild Afghanistan, help calm the situation down, and make sure that this epidemic, all of these people scrambling to climb on a plane, in a jammed, crowded plane in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
Good. What could? Yeah. So I've been testing this field research by calling some right-wing shows this morning, specifically down in Texas, and asking, if you all don't want to take the vaccine, how about we ship it over to Afghanistan as a peace offering, and that since it would take a week to take effect, their hotels could be filled, and they could sell a whole bunch of meals and hotel rooms for a solid week with people trying to get out. And they would self-quarantine down in there. And the vaccines, of course, would be available to the people of Afghanistan, too. And if the health department of Kabul or Afghanistan in tota want to take advantage of this opportunity, pick a non-biased agency, as the United Nations Health Organization.
So what kind of response have you gotten, David, from calling?
Well, just as I expected. They can have it.
Really? Send the vaccine to Afghanistan. Amazing. What a fascinating take.
It was, since it's going to go bad over here anyway.
Yeah, and this is happening, although we are starting to pick up, but it is happening. David, thank you for the call. James in Manitoba, Canada. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hey, how are you? I got a question to ask you. How many years have the U.S. government supplied the training for the Afghanistan Army, and is that not like
right up until summer of last year?
Pardon me?
From 2001 or maybe early 2002. I mean, I think we invaded in October.
Where is the where's Army now? Like I say, were they not protecting their?
It no longer exists.
Oh, so it's the dispersed type of thing, and the Taliban taking over.
What happened was last year when Donald Trump was president, he got the head of the Taliban out of prison in Pakistan, and 5,000 of his worst fighters, sent them back to Afghanistan, put them on the battlefield, and then he negotiated a surrender with the head of the Taliban. We will simply give you the country. We're going to walk away. You can take everything. You can take our military equipment. You can do whatever you want. It's all yours. No, an unconditional surrender is what Donald Trump negotiated. Let me just finish here, James. It was supposed to happen on May 1st, or be done by May of this year. Biden came into office in January 20th. He looked at the situation and said, this is going to take more than just a few months, February, March, April, May. It's going to take, so we're going to move this deadline back to August, and began reaching out to Americans in Afghanistan and trying to get them out. My personal criticism or critique is that they weren't doing enough to try and get the other, like the translators, people who had worked with us out. My guess is that they were looking at the political blowback, which they're getting right now. Oh my God, you're bringing 100,000 brown people to America? That's, it was totally predictable. But in any case, and for whatever reason, that's what happened. But after Trump negotiated that surrender to the Taliban back a year and a half ago, after he negotiated that, the Taliban went to all of the, literally local Taliban people all over the country, went to the local army people who were employed by the Afghan government, the Ghani government that we had put up and that we were funding. We were providing 80% of their funding. We were paying these people. And said, keep taking your money from the Afghan government. Keep taking that American money. It's good for our communities. And get all the military equipment you can. And when they pull out, and they're going to, because Trump just signed this deal, when they pull out, in May, or Biden turned it back to August, then just put down your weapons and join us, become part of the Taliban. Or if you don't want to be a combatant, just give us the weapons and just walk away. And that's literally exactly what happened just a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, well, you have a great show. I love to listen to you guys all the time.
Okay, well, thank you, James, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM up there in Canada. I appreciate the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. it can't be said often enough. Donald Trump negotiated a complete surrender with the Taliban. And now Joe Biden, is stuck with it. He is trying to get us out. But, let's be clear. Bush lied us into this war as part of his re-election strategy, and Trump screwed it up even worse.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm going to say this, Tom. Biden has basically gotten us out of Afghanistan, or almost has, because I think there's going to be some troops there in Kabul. Certainly better than the 4 years it took Nixon to get us out of Vietnam.
Yeah, it was actually 8 years. I mean, Nixon didn't get us out of Vietnam. That was Jerry Ford who pulled us out of Vietnam. Right. And Nixon, when he was elected in 68, his pitch was that he had a secret plan to end the war. He blew up LBJ's negotiations, as you know. I know you listen to the program regularly. I play that clip all the time.
Yes. Yeah, the April 1968 peace talks. Right. Other than that, though, while you were doing your mid half hour break there, I put on CNN, and they had this panel on, and they're just saying Biden's lying and all this and that. It was just really turning.
Oop, Dennis just dropped. I'm guessing it happens sometimes. People push their button. So Nancy in Elkhart, Indiana. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I really have a question that I don't know if you would explain or other people, but I hear a lot of the people asking, and other people asking why, if Biden hadn't started hadn't started planning to get people out back in February or March, or even in early spring.
Right.
wouldn't the planes started coming into the airport and getting people out, our helpers, wouldn't the Taliban have noticed this and started killing people anyway?
Well, they might have made it difficult, but the Taliban didn't control the country at that time. We basically held at least much of Afghanistan right up through the end of July. And, the Biden administration did reach out to Americans in Afghanistan and said, get the hell out. And as an earlier caller pointed out, a number of Americans said, no, we're going to stay here. But that said, the State Department had this really rigorous criteria for who they were going to give these visas that would get them out of the country and into the United States. And
you said, where do you draw the line?
Right, they should have loosened that criteria.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, is that even if they saw, it would seem to me that even if they started seeing, I know those visas were, like I heard that on Rachel Maddow, but it would seem to me, even if they had started seeing a pattern, they kind of would have kept these notes.
Well, it's hard to say. They might have wanted to get rid of the malcontents too. It's hard to say exactly how the Taliban would have responded, but I'm putting a lot of this on Anthony Blinken, the head of the State Department. He's our Secretary of State, and the State Department should have loosened the requirements for these special exit visas that are being given to people who had worked with American forces. And because they didn't, they had this list of 80,000 people that the Taliban now has, and they are looking for these folks. And we should have gotten them out before now. It's just, in my opinion, it's just that simple.
I see. So they could have started it a long time ago and then at least had it in progress.
They could have started in a much more aggressive fashion.
A year or so ahead.
Much earlier, yeah. And of course, the Trump administration should have started this back, a year and a half ago when they gave away Afghanistan to the Taliban. But they didn't do that. They had, they did none of the type. Because, Donald Trump, it's just like his deal with the vaccines. Hey, we'll write a check to start the vaccine production, Operation Warp Speed. Distribute them? Oh, no, that's work. Are you kidding? We'll be back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. We try to have a lot of content over at ThomHartmann.com, and of course, every day my daily rant goes up at HartmannReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at ThomHartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. It's over at ThomHartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. I just want to put a punctuation mark on all this. It seems to me that the way that Donald Trump handled Afghanistan was pretty identical to the way he handled the vaccines. You'll recall that, in the last year of his presidency, Donald Trump signed legislation or signed an executive order or whatever it was that created this Operation Warp Speed thing that funneled millions of dollars to companies like Moderna. None of that money went to Pfizer, by the way. Pfizer developed their own vaccine independently. But they gave millions of dollars to a couple of vaccine operations, and I believe it was Moderna and J&J, to rapidly develop vaccines. So they rapidly developed vaccines. And then when the Biden administration came into office on January 20th of this year, they looked around and said, okay, where's the plan to distribute these vaccines? And Trump had literally never put a plan into place. He had put Jared in charge of this, and Jared was too busy going over to the Middle East to try to borrow $1 billion from the United Arab Emirates. So there was no plan. Well, it's the same thing with Afghanistan. Trump negotiated a surrender, a United States surrender to the Taliban in Afghanistan last year, and put into place no plan whatsoever to get Americans out of that country and to get out of that country the people who helped us. The Biden administration actually, when they came into office, started the process of getting people out, particularly Americans. I think the critique or the criticism of them has to be clearly and carefully calibrated. You know, hey, you could have done this better. But it's not like, you know, the right-wing media is like, oh, you know, Kamala Harris thinks the 25th Amendment, and oh, you know, I mean, this is going to be their big thing. And then, of course, we've got DeSantis down in Florida, you know, basically using the virus as a political weapon. You know, let's kill a few public school teachers. Let's terrify them. Yeah, that's going to work. While the private schools are all fully masked, right, in Florida. Ned in Linton, Tennessee, it says you, or Linden, Tennessee, it says you disagree with me. What's up?
Well, I don't know that I necessarily disagree with you. I just happened upon your station, and so I don't listen very often. So, but my question is, if Fauci has a patent on the virus, why is he not in jail for spreading?
No, Fauci does not have a patent on the virus, Ned. You've been reading too many bizarre Facebook posts. Seriously, Fauci did not patent this virus. William in Pasadena, that's bizarre. William in Pasadena. Hey, William, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Yeah, I wanted to talk about this Afghanistan pullout because I'm 71 and I lived through the Vietnam pullout.
Yep, me too.
And what really bugs me about this whole thing is that we see all the dialogue on the mass media about how this was a terrible mistake and so on and so on. And we heard all the same dialogue in 1975.
Right.
And we don't understand other cultures. We don't understand that we can't go in, disturb cultures that are thousands of years old, and expect to change them in a few years. And what really bugs me is that when I watch the media, I'm watching reporters that are 30 or 40 years old that didn't even exist during the Vietnam pullout having all this criticism. Yeah. And what really bugs me even further is that we've got an endless supply of young people that are going to be manipulated again 20 years from now into going into another culture that's thousands of years old and doing it all over again.
Yeah, when the last man dies who remembers the horrors of the last great war, the next great war becomes inevitable. Arnold Toynbee.
And one other thing is when I was watching the president discuss the pullout, he said, I finally learned the hard way. It's sad that it took him to be 78 years old to learn. He's been around a long time.
Well, I think Biden knew. I mean, in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, he said, I don't see how this could have been done better, the withdrawal. I mean, I would offer the suggestion that they should have loosened up the visa requirements early on, but it's going to be a cluster no matter what. It's going to be a disaster no matter what, because okay, we're going to try and get out the 80,000 people who work directly for us. Well, what about the roughly 2 million people who worked with us at various times, who also have a target on their back? I mean, where do you draw the line? There's always going to be somebody who's trying to climb that wall to get into the airport at the last minute. There's always going to be somebody. And as long as the media just focuses on those folks and says, oh my God, and forgets that we were lied into this war in the first place, that we stayed there for 20 years because 3 different presidential administrations didn't have the courage to say this was a mistake, we need to get the hell out. It's media malpractice, frankly, William. William, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll continue our conversation. Actually, we're going to talk to Professor Wolff right after this. Stick around. This is going to get fascinating.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee, instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master-slaves, feudalism had lord-serfs, and monarchy had king-subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of today's program. On the line with us, our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, including his latest, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff with 2 Fs. He also has a website, rdwolff with 2 Fs.com. Professor Wolff, welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us again. The Republicans and some of the so-called conservative Democrats are out there just freaking out about the national debt, particularly with regard to the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. I think a lot of the time when those of us in the media talk about the debt, the deficit, the impact of it, how it might or might not cause inflation, all these things, we assume a level of knowledge that most people probably don't actually have. Could you, as a professor of economics, could you give us a little primer on what is the deficit, what is the debt, what is the impact of that debt, and thoughts on this whole modern monetary theory that really the debt is savings, that you have to have a certain amount of national debt, that when Andrew Jackson paid off the entire national debt back in the 1830s, it produced the longest and deepest depression in American history because there was no safe place for people or government to store money in treasuries. and that, you know, there is actually an upside to having a national debt. So let me just toss all that in your lap, Professor.
Okay, yes, it isn't all that complicated. Before I start, though, there is just a word. It's shameless what the Republicans are doing. Not that the Democrats are all that much better, but the Republicans, this occasional decision that the national debt is a big problem, when the biggest boost to it was the tax cut of December 2017 and last year's deficit budget by Mr. Trump. I mean, it really boggles the mind that they can get away with this. But having said that, let me answer your question. First, the deficit. Very simple. The government of the United States in Washington, D.C. has to spend money on a whole host of things. The military, Social Security, maintaining roads and bridges more or less, and a whole host of other programs that touch all of us. The way that the government gets the money to spend is by doing one of two things: taxing us, that means we have to give them money, end of story, or borrowing the money from us. The deficit is the amount of money borrowed. In other words, it's simply the difference between the amount of money raised in taxes by Washington relative to the amount of money they spend. If they spend more than what they raise in taxes, there's a deficit. And by the way, if you're interested, if they spend less than they raise in taxes, which has happened, that's called a budgetary surplus. Number two now, the debt. The debt of the United States is the total of all of the deficits our government has ever run, minus whatever portion of that deficit the government paid back. So it's really the deficit is your annual borrowing, and the debt is the total sum of all of that borrowing. Now we get to the question, what are the consequences of a deficit? And here's where ignorance and malevolence meet, because the answer to that question is not possible, because what the impact of a deficit is, or what the impact of a national debt is, depends on all the other things going on in the economy at the same time, because they will determine more than the size of the debt or the size of the deficit what the impact will be. That's why when people either tell you the deficit will cause X, or with equal confidence the deficit will not cause X, both of them are nuts and shouldn't be taken seriously, because they think all of the other things that influence the outcome somehow don't matter, and that's never been true. And I'll give you the simplest example, because that's what's in the news. Sometimes when the government runs a deficit and accumulates a debt, it has the consequence of producing rising prices and inflation. That's right. But there are many examples of the government running a deficit and building up the debt when there's no inflation as a result, which, by the way, was the case for years after the Great Recession of 2008 and 9. The lesson there is not that it's either yes or no, deficits cause inflation. The answer is to recognize what all economics teaches, which is a deficit is simply one of many ongoing events in an economy, and whatever happens after you run a deficit depends as much on all of those other things as it does on the deficit itself.
What are your thoughts on the modern monetary theory proposal that because the Constitution gives the Treasury, not the Fed, which didn't exist back then, but the Treasury Department, gives the Treasury Department the right to to mint coins and to determine their value, that the Treasury could mint, say, 20 $1 trillion platinum coins, say that they're worth $1 trillion each, and then cash those coins in with the Fed and pay down the national debt, but buy a bunch of our bonds with those coins, or however they do it. I don't know. It seems a little too slick by half, but I've had people who explain this stuff on this program, and I can't punch holes in their argument. Tell me about your thoughts on this.
Sure. Let's make sure we all understand how this game is played. The responsibility of funding the government is in the hands of the U.S. Treasury. They're the ones who collect the taxes we pay, who borrow when that's necessary, and who then pay out the checks to pay for what the government undertakes. So the Treasury handles a deficit as follows. If the government's going to spend more than it takes in taxes, it's the Treasury that issues a kind of security. They're called Treasury securities. And depending on for how long this borrowing goes on, they're either a Treasury bill or a Treasury bond. These names don't matter so much, but think of it as IOUs, pieces of paper very carefully printed that say that if you lend money to the government, they will give you in exchange one of these IOUs, paying you interest for the number of years that this debt is for and paying you back at the end. Now, of course, anybody can hold the Treasury security. They will have given their money to the federal government as a loan, and they will now be the proud possessor of the Treasury security. But, and here's the crucial thing, they don't have to do that. These Treasury securities are negotiable. That means you can buy and sell them. And what huge lenders to the United States government normally do, and I'm talking here about banks, large corporations, insurance companies, the big player in lending money to the government, what they usually do is turn around and sell that security. Often within minutes of buying it from the Treasury, they resell it to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve uses its own right to print new money to buy those things. So that's why the Federal Reserve is one of the largest holders of U.S. Treasuries in the world, because it has been printing money and pumping it into the economy by buying the debt that is issued by the Treasury. The minute you understand that, you can see why modern monetary theory asks the question, why are we going through this crazy two-step? Why not let the government, the Treasury and the Fed together, simply print money and use it to let the government do the things we want it to do? Because if you did that, there'd be no debts. There'd be none of this crazy anxiety, and it's very expensive to boot, to go through this indirection of having the Treasury borrow it, only to see the people it borrows from turn around and sell those securities right off to the Fed and bringing new money into the economy that way. And the modern monetary theory are quite right. The government could do that. There's no problem. The only reason we don't have the government do it is that when we have in the past, as we have, allowed governments to do that, it never took very long before people took over the government, right-wingers, left-wingers, in between, and abused the money printing power in ways that made people freak out. And so this device was developed, make them go through this two-step process, which basically allows banks, insurance companies, and big corporations to have an outsized influence, because if they're not willing to lend to the Treasury, this game can't be played. But of course, for the mass of people, this is a shenanigan among the people who run our economy. All the rest of it are left out because there really is little to no democratic control over how any of this is handled.
Wow. So should we be printing trillion-dollar coins or not?
Well, I think the problem is whether we go through the two steps I've described or whether we shift over to modern monetary theory. The only real difference is all of the yowling, usually by people who have a ulterior motive, and they're mostly Republicans, this periodic, convenient yowling over the deficit would stop because the government's spending of money would not involve borrowing.
And that would blow
up. They
up. wouldn't
have that argument.
Right,
but
that
I'm sure those folks could find other arguments.
Right, that would blow up Jude Wanniski's strategy that he put in the Wall Street Journal back in the 1970s that Reagan adopted, where he said, you know, Republicans going forward, what they should do is whenever they have power, they should spend money like drunken sailors, and then as soon as Democrats come into power, they should scream about the national debt. And they literally...
And that's what they've done.
That's exactly right.
What they've
they
done.
have literally adopted...
Done.
He called it the two Santa Claus theory. He said the Democrats get to play Santa Claus with Social Security and unions and minimum wage. Republicans need to play Santa Claus with tax cuts and force the Democrats to shoot their own Santa Claus by screaming about the debt so that the Democrats are forced to stop spending money. It was brilliant, and it's still going on, as you said. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, rdwolff.com, Prof. Wolff over on Twitter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Always great talking to you. I always learn something. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It is 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Ron in San Francisco. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
I've been focusing on all this, the economy and the relationship of the economy to the COVID situation and then the fires we have in California. I had been working with and updating with these kids at the student project OpenBeyond.org, and they're talking about going back to school and wearing these masks for COVID. What about the masks for the particulate in the wildfires that get into your lungs and...
Is that starting to hit you there in San Francisco?
I'm now up in Hamilton Field, which is north of San Francisco in Novato area.
Uh-huh.
And we got heavy smoke here.
Oh, my.
And
that's brutal stuff. We had that last year here in Portland, and it took me a month before my throat was no longer sore. And that stuff is bad. I mean, it's just not good at all. So yeah, you want to wear a mask, when the smoke is around. And the kind of good news is that KN95 masks, which are the most effective ways to keep that particulate matter out of your lungs, are now ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You can buy them at 7-Eleven, which was very much not the case a year ago.
Let's get them to the kids. Let's get them to the kids.
Yeah.
You're sending to school. You're putting the mask on for COVID. They're useless for the particulate. Fine particulate in the wildfire smoke, the toxic substances that get into and affect your immune system. Let's get a campaign. If you're going to have kids wear masks, have them wear these N95 masks when they're going to and from school, because that atmosphere, if you're in the smoke atmosphere, that could be permanently affect your immune system.
Ron. Absolutely, and make those masks available, mail them out to people, do whatever's necessary. Ron, thank you. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Just one quick point on Afghanistan. Donald Trump also stabbed the Kurds in the back. So he's got a record of doing that sort of thing.
And he did that in Syria, terribly.
Every chance we can. Yeah. But on deficits, as you'll recall, Bill Clinton never cut spending when he was president. He balanced the budget. Had 3 years of balanced budget. And the only time those balanced budgets disappeared is when George W. Bush lowered taxes for the rich that was supposed to stimulate the economy, and we got a recession out of it.
Yeah, you're right, because Clinton raised taxes, and it boosted the economy.
Right. And every Republican who was in Washington voted against that tax increase.
Yep.
And it took Al Gore, because a few Democrats voted against it also. It took Al Gore to come in and break the tax.
Yeah, you're right. I remember. Thank you for the reminder, Larry. You're always so on top of these economic issues. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, but he left one thing out, your guest, when he was talking. That was QE.
Quantitative easing.
That's another quantitative easing. That's another way that, and I consider it an evil way that the government puts money into circulation, because it's designed to only help corporations. And
You mean the buying corporate bonds part of QE? Because there's also a buying governments part of QE, bond part of QE, which is just the old-fashioned way of doing it.
But you're buying them mostly from rich people and corporations, also.
Yeah.
And so there's a way that they could do it. They could actually buy into people's mortgages, use quantitative easing to do that, and that would help most of the American people. And the banks and the corporations will still end up getting all the money.
Yeah, and let people refinance a 1%.
Right.
You know, although that may have the effect of really altering home prices around the country. But it's worth thinking about. Larry, thank you. Thank you for the call. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at hartmannreport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com and at hartmannreport.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. One other thing I wanted to just, flag and put on your consciousness dashboard, as it were. There's some really great news, and this has to do with fewer children ending up brain damaged as a result of simply eating food in our food supply. During the Obama administration, the Environmental Protection Agency made the decision to ban this extraordinarily powerful pesticide. I think it's called chlorpyrifos. Well, who knows? I am not chlorpyrifos. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's it. Anyhow, first of all, it was whacking farm workers. They were, pregnant women were giving birth to children that were severely mentally damaged. And secondly, this was farm workers' women. Secondly, it was spreading across America, in our food supply, and we were feeding it to our children. And so the Obama administration said, we're going to ban this stuff. They made the decision in 2015. The EPA under President Obama, this is from today's Washington Post, responded by proposing to prohibit the pesticide. But Scott Pruitt, Donald Trump's EPA administrator, said, no, we're going to reverse that. The pesticide industry, hey, they're big donors to the Republican Party and have been forever. This goes back to 92 when Bill Clinton decided that the Democratic Party was going to take money from clean industries like banks and insurance companies and health insurance companies, and we'll let the dirty industries like the pesticide manufacturers contribute to the Republicans. So Scott Pruitt reversed that and said, oh, no, you can spread this poison on our food supply all you want. And that's been going on for, a decade, a couple of decades now. This first popped up in the late 90s. The Clinton administration looked at it and said, well, we need to do some serious studying on this. This does not look good at all. And they began the process. The Bush administration put it on hold for 8 years while we continued to poison our children. And then the Obama administration came in and said, no, let's ban it. And they started the process to ban it in 2015. And it just never quite happened, I guess. And now Trump is saying, oh, no, we're going to keep it going. Or then Trump said that. But now the Biden administration has said enough. The EPA will ban the use of the pesticide. This final rule was released yesterday, and it'll put a stop to the spraying of chlorpyrifos on fruits and vegetables across the country. About time, right? About damn time. Good on them. We'll be back with your calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations and right-wing billionaires would really rather you didn't know all about. Thom Hartmann. I'll be back with your calls right after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturer's lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those at the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
Hello, I wanted to, I know that you've been covering the situation in Afghanistan, understandably so, all week. And I had a comment I wanted to make about that, Tom. You know, since World War II, I think it's arguable that the United States has, quote-unquote, won any war. First of all, the American people, so to speak, are never told what that victory should look like. Certainly can't claim victory in Iraq. I mean, Iran has more influence there than it ever has. Can't claim victory in Vietnam. Can't claim victory in North Korea. Certainly can't claim victory in Afghanistan. So I think that until the United States rids itself of this penchant for violence, and I really think that's the root of it. If you take violence out of the equation, the United States really has accomplished nothing. Not even domestically does it accomplish things without violence. And I think that's really where the American people have to do some soul searching, because we no longer live in a society or a world where you can go around beating up people and taking their things. It's just the dynamics aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
And lastly, I wanted to say, if I could, Tom, as all of this talk of Afghanistan has swirled around all week long, and people are pontificating on a place that most of them can't even find on a map, 1,800 miles away in Haiti, I have almost 2,000 black men, women, and children who have died, and I've heard nothing about it. And that I think the silence there is deafening.
Yeah. Well, we're going to open our next hour with that topic, Kenyatta. But it is a crisis in our own hemisphere. And the U.S. military, the Biden administration, just dispatched a number of planes, and there's a ship on its way to Haiti to try to help deal with that situation. But spot on everything you said, and thank you very much for it. Dan, in Chicago. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind?
Yeah, talking about the Afghanistan situation, I always thought the United States didn't negotiate with terrorists, like Trump and Pompeo.
Before Trump, we didn't.
And then another thing, if Trump rescinded our agreement in the Paris Accords, couldn't Biden have just said, listen, Trump he's not all there mentally, and so we're going to have to go back on that arrangement.
But see, that raises the question, and this is what Kenyatta was just talking about. We have not had a war since World War II. What we've had is a series of police actions using sketchy things like this authorization to use military force, the AUMF, that really needs to be nuked. And, we did this in Libya, we did this in Iraq, we did this in Afghanistan, we did this in Korea with the so-called police action Harry Truman did. We did it, obviously, in Vietnam. Every single one of those were misadventures, I'd say, at the very least. In fact, Harry Truman's screw-up in Korea is what led to the Republicans taking the White House in 1952 with Dwight Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, a Republican, campaigned on, you can see the ad on YouTube these days. It was this elephant marching across, a cartoon of an elephant marching across a stage, a theater stage, with the curtains and everything, with a big drum, those big drums that you put in front of you, for marching bands, beating the drum, and the drum had the word peace on it, and the voice over it says, "Vote for Eisenhower, vote for peace." That's what won the presidential election in 1952, because people were so sick and tired of the damn Korean War, which was not a declared war, the Korean police action, and it lost Harry Truman that election, or that re-election. And then you've got, the Vietnam War that LBJ really got us into, another Democrat. I mean, this used to be my father's rant, right? There's Democrats and their wars. And then we've got, now this was George W. Bush got us into Afghanistan and Iraq. So I guess the tables have, balanced now, or the scales have balanced. But in every single one of these cases, and a whole bunch of the smaller ones, Ronald Reagan using this to invade Grenada as part of his re-election campaign for 1984. Every single one of these efforts has been, in my opinion, unconstitutional. The Constitution says only Congress can declare war. And when Congress declares a war, they make it very clear exactly who is the recipient of that war and how that war, what it will look like when that war is over. And we have not been doing that, again, as Kenyatta pointed out, and it's just nuts. It is just a complete nuts. It's just completely nuts. Dan, thank you for the call. Rick in Queen Creek, Arizona. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I want to subtitle your today's show as the Great Republican Bear Trap Show.
Okay, yeah, from Jude Wanniski to Afghanistan, huh?
Yeah, I mean, let's go back and remember the last intelligent individual that worked in the Trump administration was Rex Tillerson. And he decided he couldn't put up with it anymore and left out, claiming the man to be a moron.
Right.
And I believe that's true. I don't think he has the intelligence some people are giving him. His advisors have always been afraid of Joe Biden because of the Barack Obama administration and the landslide elections. Mm-hmm. Well, the first one, not the second one. But anyway, you can tell because before Uncle Joe had even thrown his hat in the ring, the Ukraine scandal starts, and he gets impeached, and then you have this huge bailout from the White House of people going, oh, no, we can't hang around for this. And so now you got the real Republican politicians stepping in. And I'm thinking they're the ones who engineered this Afghanistan.
They are all over the media. These people who were formerly in the Bush administration, they're on CNN and MSNBC all the time, or who were cheerleaders for the Bush administration.
It's like they knew it. They knew it was coming. And like I said before, I'm a retired Air Force brat, and when I heard that he had closed 10 air bases, I knew it smelled. It passed the smell test.
And that was a year ago. Yeah.
Another Republican, debacle. And then the date is after the election.
Right. Right. Yeah. It was as if he knew, exactly what was going to happen. Rick, thank you. Very well said. Martin in Seattle. Hey, Martin, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to maybe play devil's advocate a little bit, and let's just assume that Joe Biden, knew that this whole thing could go south and had a very good chance of it.
Which is what he told George Stephanopoulos yesterday, by the way. He said, I don't see any way to get out that's not disorderly.
Right. I mean, and of course, Biden said that he didn't think it would happen. He said it was very remote. But
You're right.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, we had a very mixed message. This is why I was, the day before yesterday, I was saying Anthony Blinken, heads need to roll.
So we know that, let's just say that Joe Biden knew this could go south. It seems pretty obvious. Everybody else knows. But so why would he have let it happen?
Oh, it's sort of like, you've got a tooth that has reached the point where the decay in the rot has gotten so bad you got to pull the tooth out. Well, it's going to hurt like hell when you pull that tooth out. But you got to do it.
So you would think that this is a long-term plan?
Yeah, I mean, we had to get out of Afghanistan. We're going to have to get out of Iraq next. And it's like, these two wars that George W. Bush lied us into. I saw this meme on Twitter that, somebody that I follow on Twitter was posting. It was a picture of George W. Bush, and he was like, I lied you guys into a 20-year-long war, and you suckers, you morons, are arguing about who's responsible for the death and destruction. Is it Biden or is it Trump? Says George W. Bush. I mean, let's be sure that we understand where the blame lies in this, who actually got us into this war. And George W. Bush is sitting around pontificating now about whether Biden is doing this correctly. What the hell? LBJ is still remembered as the guy who gave us the Vietnam War, even though Jerry Ford ended it. I hope that history records this as George W. Bush's war, not as Joe Biden's.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's it's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. George in Santee, California. Hey, George, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Thanks for taking my call. I question the level of danger that these people we're evacuating from Afghanistan are in. And here's why. Supposedly, I guess we had 300,000 Afghan soldiers that we were paying to actually shoot at the Taliban.
Right.
And all they had to do was lay down their arms and swear allegiance to the Taliban. If they're not in danger, how much danger could these people be in?
Those soldiers were Afghan nationals who were working for an Afghan government that was one step removed from the United States. The Afghan government, the Ghani government, was taking money from us. We provided 80% of their revenue, and thus was paying those soldiers. But I think that there's, not just in the mind of the Taliban, I think probably generally, people would draw a distinction between, your average grunt, the guy on the ground, or for example, the American soldiers in Vietnam. I mean, they were not responsible for Lyndon Johnson's policies or Richard Nixon's policies. So they draw a line. They draw a distinction between the people who were just, trying to provide for their families by taking a job in the military versus the people who actually integrated themselves into the U.S. military by being translators or by being technicians or by being scouts or, there's a whole bunch of job categories where people were actually working day to day with the U.S. military. When those are the people that are being viewed as turncoats. As quislings was the old phrase, after the Norwegian collaborator with the Nazis. And we should have seen this coming. Well, apparently we did see it coming. We just didn't, in my opinion, we didn't respond anywhere near fast enough. And we put way too many restrictions on how do we identify who these people are. Make sense, George?
Well, I know that when it comes to the wars, the lies never stop.
Yeah.
And some of this might be created just to give a picture of chaos, just for the optics of it.
Well, it could be. I mean, what's going to happen is the same thing that's happening on our southern border, that you've got some people who are legitimate, who have a legitimate claim to get out of Iraq because they worked with us and for us. Then you've got a lot of people who are looking at, or Afghanistan, excuse me. And then you've got a lot of people who are looking at just life in Afghanistan under the Taliban and thinking this is going to suck. Our country's going to go back to being, the poorest country in the world. It's going to be a hellhole. My kids won't be able to go to school. It's just going to be terrible. So I'm going to try and get on one of those airplanes and get to the United States and let them sort it out later. And so, the horrible conundrum that the State Department was facing, that Anthony Blinken was facing, and I'll give him this, I'll cut him this amount of slack, was how do you make the distinction between people who actually, their lives are at risk because they directly worked with us in ways that were viewed as essentially traitorous by the Taliban and other people in Afghanistan, versus those people who are simply trying to get to the United States because they don't want to stay in a country that's going to go to hell in a handbasket. And, they came up, the State Department had this system with these visas where you had to prove that you actually worked for somebody, a contractor or the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps, whatever. And it just became cumbersome and slow. And it was the main reason why, Biden moved back the departure date from May to August. But it didn't work like it was supposed to. And frankly, I think that our State Department deserves some criticism for that. Hopefully they'll clean this up.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Of course, at hartmannreport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at hartmannreport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at thomhartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at hartmannreport.com and thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a day, huh? Talking about what's going on here. Don in Winsboro, South Carolina. Hey, Don, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you again. I'm listening to you and other programs, and they're talking about how you just mentioned that LBJ is like the owner of getting us into Vietnam. Right. But I was a teenager in the 60s, and I remember JFK, and I Googled it. It said in 1961, JFK authorized 500 support troops, special forces into Vietnam.
Yeah, they called them advisors.
Okay, well, to me, I don't know, maybe even Eisenhower had something to do with putting some people in Vietnam. But I think if it started in 61 with Kennedy, and it went on until Kennedy was assassinated, and I just don't give the whole ownership to LBJ.
Yeah. Well, you know, Kennedy made us a partisan in that war. You're absolutely right. We took sides in a civil war, which was a mistake. But it was Lyndon Johnson. It was after the assassination of John Kennedy. Harry Enrique Ruiz Williams, who was one of the leaders of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and worked with Bobby Kennedy to get the essentially hostages, the soldiers out of Cuba that had participated in that. He had to ransom them out. We paid the Castro government $1 million or more, and Harry worked with Bobby very, very closely. And Harry told me the story. They had the number 3 guy in Cuba, who was Ernesto. I'm trying to remember his name. It wasn't Ernesto. It was Juan Almejeda. He was the head of the Cuban military, at the head of the army. And he had worked out a deal with Harry himself. Harry was a Cuban national. He had worked out this deal with Harry on behalf of Bobby Kennedy that if we could get a team into Cuba to assassinate Castro, then Almejeda would take over the country on behalf of the United States and basically turn Cuba back over to the U.S. So after the assassination of John Kennedy, while they still thought, Lyndon Johnson still believed there was a very good chance that Castro was behind killing Kennedy. When that happened, Harry and Bobby went into LBJ's office and said, we've got Almejeda in Cuba. He is ready for us to assassinate Castro and invade Cuba, and he will assist. And we would like you to say yes. And LBJ exploded. And Harry told me this story personally. I was sitting in a restaurant in Golden, Colorado, drinking whiskey with Harry when he told me this story. And LBJ just exploded and said, I don't want to hear another word about those damn Cubans. And I'm up to my eyeballs in these effing Cubans. And he just went nuts about it because, again, he thought that the Cubans had something to do with killing Kennedy and that it was blowback for the Bay of Pigs invasion. And he said, I'm going to make my stand against communism as far the hell away from this country as I can get. I'm going to do it in Vietnam. And that was, assuming that Harry was telling me the truth, and I have no reason to believe he wasn't, and events certainly lined up around that. I think that was the thing. If you were going to run for re-election in the United States in the 1960s, you had to prove your anti-communist credentials. And, it was a requirement. And both Republicans and Democrats, although it was like the golden calf for Republicans, and Democrats were kind of being dragged along behind on it. And so to the best of my knowledge, that is what started our turning to us from being a partisan in Vietnam under Kennedy into being an active participant in Vietnam under LBJ. And, it was, as we know now, it was a disaster. So. Okay,
well, thank you, Tom, and enjoy talking with you, and I appreciate you and your staff and crew and all the good work you do.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for your kind words. Milt in Ireland, Michigan. Hey, Milt, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just had a question. You had Richard Wolff on kind of discussing financial operation of our government under a democracy. My question is, how detrimental would the same operation financially of our government be under an autocracy?
I know the difference between a democracy and autocracy, but I don't really understand your question.
Would the financial, let's say, aid to, let's say, food stamps, financial aid to low-income people,
when Hitler took over Germany, he not only expanded the social safety net in Germany, the social welfare program, strengthened their single-payer healthcare system, but he also kickstarted German industry. He developed the Volkswagen, the people's wagon, the people's car, and built the German Autobahn. And the people loved him for it. By 1937, he was the most popular politician in the world. He was on the cover of Time magazine. So, and he was a complete autocrat. So autocracy versus democracy, it doesn't, you know, that's not what defines whether an economy works or not. It's whether the government's making the correct decisions.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
All right, I was just curious. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Milt. Diane in Flemington, New Jersey. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind?
Tom, you are just the best.
Thank you.
Somebody called in earlier.
Oh, Diane, I'm sorry. We're hitting the break here. I'm going to put you on hold and pick up your call in the next hour if you don't mind hanging around for a while. We do have a guest. I don't mind. Okay, thank you. We have a guest on the other side of this break about Haiti, and I really want to get into that topic. Kenyatta was absolutely right. We've been nowhere close to the kind of coverage of that disaster that we should have been providing. And we're going to start in about 7 minutes. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849, and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side has called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, you know, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred His-Hapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors. Such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Hartman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to our program. Thom Hartmann here with us. On the line with us is Jake Johnston. Jake is the Senior Research Associate at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, one of the better progressive economic think tanks out there that we've worked with for years. CEPR.net is the website. Jake's Twitter handle is Jakob, J-A-K-O-B, Johnston, or at CEPRDC, or Haiti Aid Watch. Jake, tell us what we know about what's going on. You've focused on Latin America for years. What's the latest on Haiti?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, there's almost too many places to know where to begin with what's going on in Haiti, right? I mean, obviously, about 6 weeks ago, the President Jakob was assassinated, triggering a large sort of political and governance crisis, which in fact sort of predated the assassination in so many ways. And then this past weekend, a 7.2 earthquake that struck the southern portion of Haiti, causing widespread devastation, and followed very quickly by Tropical Storm Grace, which dumped floodwaters all over the south as well. So it's an extremely difficult situation on the ground right now.
Yeah. What is being done? I understand the U.S. military is bringing planes in there right now as we speak.
Yeah, and I think, what's most important to remember, I mean, it is Haitians who are the natural first responders, and it is Haitians who are helping neighbors, communities, families, and have been mobilizing nonstop since the disaster, right? And it is really, I think from everything I'm hearing, local organizations that are really sort of taking the lead in this response on the ground in the South.
So your blog, Haiti Relief and Reconstruction Watch, you're talking about, well, there's just a whole pile of stuff here over at CEPR. We're talking with Jake Johnston. What can individual Americans do who want to help out? Where are there pressure points? Are there good organizations? Are there things that we should be doing, or ways that we can increase aid to Haiti? And going forward, what sort of reforms? I mean, Haiti is in a political crisis right now. We had, after the assassination of the former president, we had a former president on this program a few weeks ago. In fact, we reached out to him to talk to him today. He was unavailable. What needs to be done there as well as here, and how can we all participate in this?
Yeah, well, I think, we've learned a lot of lessons from the 2010 earthquake and the response to that, which, in so many ways was a real disaster in its own right. And then one of the main lessons was, rather than supporting these big foreign NGOs to come in and try and sort of impose solutions from abroad, to support local organizations, right? And so, if there are people watching exactly inside Haiti. And so if there are folks watching the show looking to get involved, looking to donate, I think the most important thing is to do some homework, right? And to find local organizations that are actually there on the ground in these affected communities. These are the people who know what these communities need and know how to actually implement effective programs. I mean, what we saw again after 2010 was billions of dollars in aid, almost all of which entirely bypassed local organizations, the Haitian government, the private sector in Haiti. And this had a really nefarious long-term impact on the development in Haiti.
So, I mean, you don't want to just like do a Google search. I mean, you might end up with some scam organization. How do you know who to send aid to or who to support if you're trying to support local Haitian charities? Are there any particular ones that you want to mention here?
Yeah, so there is an organization, Haiti Response Coalition, that has put together a list of local organizations, trusted organizations. Again, but I think, there are, lots of ways to try and find these organizations. I mean, certainly, again, doing one's homework and finding credible organizations, and it is possible. But again, I urge folks to look at the list put out by the Haiti Response Coalition. There's just a number of organizations there that are certainly on the ground and leading the response right now.
Is there a specific website for the Haiti Response? Tell me that name again.
Haiti Response Coalition.
Coalition.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. Here it is. It's HaitiResponse.org is the website for them. I'm looking at that website right now. They also have a Facebook page. And they say the Haiti Response Coalition is a cross-sector platform for sharing information and organizing collaborative action for a stronger Haiti. Members of the coalition actively seek to expand their knowledge, cooperation, and collective action using a human rights-based approach. They go through values and coalition members and things. Oh, they're doing a lot of stuff. They're doing COVID. They're doing, response. Good start. Okay.
And I think, going back to your question, too, and connecting this to the political situation, because I think that's such a critical issue here. Right? We so often try and think of humanitarian issues and politics as these sort of two separate siloed things, right, and not connected, and yet they're so deeply connected, right? And oftentimes when an aid project goes wrong, or after the 2010 earthquake, to try and sort of explain away some of the failures, everything's blamed on the political instability, right? And I think we have to take a step back and look at some of the root causes of that political instability and understand that it's actually been these foreign interventions, both after natural disasters, but also more overt political interventions, overturning electoral results, supporting coups d'etats, et cetera, that have really undermined the government, contributed to the political instability, and which generate the difficulty that we see, manifesting itself today in the response to the earthquake, to the tropical storms, et cetera.
Yeah, well, there's two things right off the top of my head. One, that Haiti had to pay reparations to France forever, basically, for having declared their own independence. And you may know off the top of your head how many years it was. It seems like it was over 50. And then secondly, the United States supported Papa Doc Duvalier and Baby Doc Duvalier, which were just, rapist administrations. I mean, they just pillaged that country. And I have, I was not all that politically aware back in those days, or at least with regard to international affairs beyond the Vietnam War. I don't know how we did that, why we supported them, why we went along with that as long as we did. Do you have any insights into that? Ways that, lessons America should learn from our involvement in this?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think, the lessons here in terms of, aid and politics, I think is the same in both cases, right? Which is not imposing solutions from abroad or thinking that we know what is best for Haiti, right? But listening to voices in Haiti and trying to support those efforts and standing in solidarity with the people of Haiti, as opposed to, again, intervening in the affairs of Haiti, right? And that's a very different dynamic. And I think you raised such an important point about this history, right? Many people abroad, the only thing they know about Haiti may be that it's, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, which seems like the sort of trademark thing that has to be in every news article. And I think the point you make, right, around these reparations, around Haiti being, born out of a successful revolt of the enslaved population, right? And that was in 1804. And this is a country that stood as an example to the world and that has been made to pay for that example for centuries. I think that has so much to do with not only the view of Haiti as this sort of inherently unstable place, but also, again, going back to the root causes of so many of the things that we see manifested today.
What was the rationale that the U.S. government used for supporting the Duvalier regimes?
It was largely under the banner of anti-communism, right? A nation.
They were our guys against Castro?
That's exactly right. And I think, in so many ways, the world has obviously changed, and yet it's obviously stayed the same in too many ways as well, right? And so, again, you see so often the interest of big donor countries such as the U.S. being at the center of our interventions and foreign assistance in Haiti, right, rather than the needs and desires of the Haitian people and the Haitian community, right? And so, again, switching this notion of trying to impose solutions versus listening to folks on the ground and standing in solidarity.
Which I think is in a way, even kind of a racist thing, this whole white savior complex and, we know what's best and all that kind of stuff. It's
exactly right.
Yeah. Jake Johnston with the Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR.net. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Dave in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I just read an article in The Guardian about a woman's experience leaving college in Afghanistan as the Taliban arrived. Mm-hmm. And it gave me the thought that, it gave me the intuition or an opinion, which I could be wrong, that the reason why the Taliban were able to take the country over in 10 days is that they probably promised child brides to all the Afghan military. And that's why the Afghan military might have folded. That being said, I think that should be reason enough for us to, on a limited basis, to set up checkpoints in the country to get more people out.
Yeah.
That just doesn't seem, if I'm right, that's just disgusting and, beneath Western values.
Well, but it's also the norm in that part of the Middle East. I mean, women have no rights in Saudi Arabia. They have no rights in Qatar. They have no rights in the United Arab Emirates. They have no rights, or they have They have some rights in Jordan, actually. The king of Jordan married an American woman.
I don't disagree with you, but the thing is, for the last 20 years, we promised women rights and espoused Western values where women could rise themselves up, and have that take.
Yeah, I think we lost Dave. But yeah, good point. Good points all, Dave. And it's therefore we've got this, shall we say, heavy karmic burden. Scotty in Seattle. Hey, Scotty, you're on the air. What's up? Scotty? No, Scotty. Okay, let's try Diane in Flemington, New Jersey. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It seems from what I've been able to research, the Taliban has a rule that there will be no COVID vaccines, and they have suspended administration in some of the areas that they have taken over control.
Really?
Not only.
I have not read that.
Okay,
Where
go
did you
online
learn
and
that?
find it. I don't have it in front of me. It was a newspaper outlet, maybe from India.
Mm-hmm.
And also, apparently, they're not big fans of vaccines in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, polio vaccines, for example. So, seems like vaccine diplomacy would be much more valuable in Haiti than in Afghanistan. And another interesting thing, when I was reading through their list of the Taliban's list of rules, it is illegal to question the police when they are punishing an offender. I had to laugh because it seems like we have that rule in this country.
Yeah. The cops who even tried to prevent the filming of the murder of George Floyd.
Exactly. And also, do you think there are holdovers in the State Department and the Pentagon that are
Trumpies?
Slyly supporting Trump's policies and helping to destroy this current administration?
I have wondered that out loud on this program on more than one occasion, particularly with regard to the State Department, but also with regard to the Pentagon and frankly, other federal agencies. I mean, the EPA and others. I have not seen any direct evidence of that, but it would astonish me if there weren't Trumpies still burrowed into these federal agencies. I mean, it was just recently that Biden got it together to fire the head of Medicare and Social Security, who were, the Trump holdovers actively trying to destroy those agencies.
Right.
And
thank
he
you,
has,
Tom. You are the best.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. And he has not yet been able to get rid of Louis DeJoy. So it's like, the idea of, Trumpies continuing to sabotage the United States of America on behalf of Donald Trump, who may well be doing it on behalf of some foreign government that he owes a pile of money to. May well be rolling on. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. 20 minutes past the hour. Just something I wanted to flag to you, particularly those of you living in California, Oregon, and Washington State, here in the Pacific Northwest. This, how horror movies always start with, some little thing that's like, hey, they just found Ralph dead by the pool. What's going on? what are these pods in my backyard? And so you just, there's always some little clue, right? And I read this story that FFR posted over on Democratic Underground today. The headline, family of 3 and their dog found dead about a mile from their vehicle while out day hiking. And I'm like, what? And you read the article, and it's like there were no signs of trauma. There's no obvious cause of death. There's no suicide note. They were in the middle of the national forest on a day hike, just a mile from their car. And their dog was dead, too, and no signs of trauma. And I'm looking at this, and they're not speculating about this in the articles. I mean, everybody is like scratching their heads what's going on. But what popped into my mind, and I hope I'm wrong on this, and I'm not saying freak out about this, but I do think we need to keep an eye on it, and I would love to hear from the California officials that sometimes what precedes tectonic activity, earthquakes, sometimes what precedes them is little cracks in the ground that gases come out from, and you find people being overwhelmed by those gases and dying. And so I hope that they nail this down quickly, because I live, we live here in Portland, and we're on, part of that giant fault line. The whole Ring of Fire thing goes up through Alaska. And, and our house, I know, was built long before there were earthquake standards. So I'm looking at this going, I am not happy about that. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Mike in Millbridge, Maine. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I want to speak about the massive right-wing propaganda and disinformation network that it's driving me crazy, because everybody is talking about Fox News and Hannity and people like that when they're spewing their propaganda as if it's their idea, as if it's coming from them. But I truly believe it's actually coming from the corporations and the billionaires, and these people get their talking orders every day from them. Because basically the Republican Party has not done anything for the people in decades. So they have nothing to run on. Since the 50s. So in the early 2000s, that's when they created this massive propaganda, disinformation, fear factory.
Actually, they started building it after the Powell memo in '71. Within 10 years, you had a dozen major right-wing think tanks. You had a group that would vet lawyers for judgeships. You had, within 15 years of that, you had the creation of Fox News. You had right-wing radio networks. You had the rise of Limbaugh and all his imitators. All that stuff arguably came out of the Powell memo in '71 and happened over the next 15 years.
I keep thinking sometimes that things happen when I pay attention to them.
Yeah.
But another thing is regarding what's currently going on with COVID-19 and the Republican governors telling their people that masks don't work and vaccines are just scams. And this basically, I think, is a pushback from when Joe Biden became president, and he made getting rid of COVID-19 a priority and started telling people to wear masks.
Mike, make no mistake about this. This is a Republican-driven effort to sabotage the economy by creating widespread sickness in the United States and in our schools, by the way. Now they're trying, in Texas and Florida and a few other states, they're trying to get kids, turn these children into basically little bombs, weapons of mass destruction, disease vectors. Contaminate the kids, expose the kids go home, the family gets sick, dad and mom can no longer go to work, the economy starts to fall apart, Biden has to impose another lockdown on the economy, and there's an election coming in just a year and a few months, and everybody knows what happens when the economy goes in the crapper. You end up with a change of administration. And, whichever party is in charge. And you've got the Democrats in the White House and the House and the Senate, And if the economy goes to hell, which is what these guys are trying to make happen, then they're going to blame Biden.
This is what I was getting at. Okay, what I was getting at is because of Biden, President Biden getting the death count down, and this operation of his working so well, the Republicans can't have that. They cannot give the Democrats and President Biden a win. So they're started this whole thing.
Yeah, my point.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm agreeing with you.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I think it goes beyond that, though. I think that they're not just trying to make Biden's efforts to contain the coronavirus seem ineffective in a vacuum. I think that they're also thinking or hoping that his efforts to contain the coronavirus will crash the economy. And the thing that tells me that is that half of the time when they're ranting about this, they include rants about the economy. We'll be back right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America against the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back with your calls.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This is from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations, plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides. 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And there was one story that I wanted to catch for you. Oh yeah, here it is. This is so sad. Ron Filipowski is tweeting about this. Steve Walsh was the press secretary to a Republican Senate candidate, Vicky Hartzler, and a husband of anti-vax Missouri State Representative and congressional candidate Sarah Walsh. And he tweeted, Steve Walsh tweeted about a decision, a Supreme Court decision, that you could choose to wear a mask or not when you go to church. And he tweeted, "This decision allows people to attend church services. If you choose to attend worship services for fear, if you choose not to attend worship services for fear
you will be one of the fraction of 1% of Americans who die from COVID. You simply don't have to attend. Problem solved. Good grief. In other words, hey, we don't need to wear masks anymore. Problem solved, right? Steve Walsh, the spokesperson for this Republican candidate, Steve Walsh just died of COVID. This is just, I can't even do Schadenfreude about this. I get no joy in reporting that. It is a tragedy. It is just an absolute tragedy that Republicans are lining up behind this bizarre direction that they were pushed by Donald Trump back in the middle of last year when he came to the conclusion in April or May of 2020 that if the lockdown continued, if people continued wearing masks, if people continued being basically afraid to interact with other people because of the pandemic, that the economy would be hurt, and as a result of that, he would lose re-election. And so he started going after masks and ridiculing masks and saying, get back to work, get back to shopping, all this kind of stuff, because he was trying to revive the economy. And now you've got Republicans who really don't want the economy to go well, and they're still attacking the masks, only now the dynamic has changed. Now, instead of a mildly deadly disease that mostly hits older people, the old boomer remover thing, now you've got a disease, really a whole brand new disease, the Delta variant of the COVID virus, that kills babies, that kills young people, that kills children, that kills people in their 20s and 30s and 40s just as effectively as it kills people in their 80s. And the Republicans are still singing this tune that Donald Trump started. And it's like they're killing their own. It's tragic. I don't have a better word for that than tragic. Tyrone in Chicago. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Yes. Okay. I've been listening to the right wing myself today, and Tom, all the right wing saying today that Joe Biden approval rating been down. Now I saw his approval rating. Oh, it is going down.
Yeah. Yeah, he's taking a hit because television is covered with pictures of people desperately trying to get out of Afghanistan. The same thing happened to Jerry Ford in '75.
Okay, is it going down as bad as they say it is?
It's going down pretty bad, but the question is, will it bounce back? They have, I saw CNN was just reporting a few minutes ago that there are 6,000 people at the Kabul airport who have been vetted by the State Department and are approved, and they got the stamp of approval, and they're just waiting for an airplane to take them out. They're flying out an airplane, one fully loaded cargo plane filled with people every hour, 24 hours a day. They think they can evacuate between 5,000 and 10,000 people a day based on, whether or not they start getting fire from the Taliban and everything else, and how many of these people are the Taliban going to allow to get to the airport. The Taliban is having to make a very strategic decision here. If they cooperate with the United States and allow people to get through their checkpoints to the airport, then they run the risk that the hardliners among them are going to be flipped out, that they can't have revenge on people who helped the American invaders. If they don't cooperate, they run the risk that Biden could take it a step further and say, okay, we're going to take down the Taliban government again, get our people out, and then leave again. In other words, they face the possibility of American violence. Then there's the third piece of this equation, and that is that a lot of these Taliban checkpoints are the way they operate. They're basically bribery stops. And this is something that people in the United States who are working to get people out, and I tweeted one of the organizations last night, one of their GoFundMe sites. I've sent them money. But what they're doing is they're having to get money to people to use for bribes for the checkpoints so that they can get to the airport, and which is a real disaster. But there's another week or so that this is going to take to resolve itself, and either it's going to resolve itself. The media narrative is either going to be, boy, Biden really screwed this up, or it's going to be, boy, Biden pulled this out of the fire. He fixed it at the last minute, and Donald Trump set up a disaster. And which by the way, I think is not only should be the media narrative, but is accurate. And so now it's just all, a matter of, where it goes from here. Tyrone, thanks a lot for the call. Azalee in Villa Park, Illinois. Hey, Azalee, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, you were talking about Haiti.
Yeah.
And they always say, well, Haiti is, I think, the poorest country in the world.
In the Northern Hemisphere, anyway, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, the thing is, okay, France invaded Haiti, right? Because France is over there where they are. Haiti is over, where they are. They came into Haiti, and they, invaded the country. And so when they left, why does Haiti have to pay them?
Because France took over Haiti in the 1700s, and forgive my imprecision here. I'm no expert or authority on Haitian history, but I've been there a couple of times, working with the government or trying to work with the government. They were demanding bribes of us, so we ended up not working with them. This was 20 years ago, but I have some familiarity with Haiti. And but I'm no historian in this regard. But my understanding is that, France was running Haiti. They were running plantations there, mostly sugarcane. They imported enslaved people that they had captured in Africa into Haiti to work those plantations. You had these large kind of palaces that were built by the French occupiers toward the end of the 18th and early 19th century. The Haitians rose up in rebellion in 1804 and had a successful revolt, a successful slave revolt. And France then said, you have to compensate us for the loss of the value of our slaves. And so for some long period of time thereafter, a century or more apparently, and that's where my memory is failing me, and I'm sorry, Azalee, I just don't remember how many years or till how long. My recollection is that it was right up until like the 1950s. Haiti was making regular reparations payments to France for France's loss of their, quote, property, the enslaved people of Haiti, which has got to be one of the most obscene little bits of historical data that, any of us have ever heard. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. One of the, is there any other place on the planet, any other thing, something like that?
I don't know. That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to it. This is the sort of thing that probably you could find with a good online search, but off the top of my head, I just don't know. Azalee, thank you very much for the call. I'm sorry I don't have, I'm not a little more comprehensive font of knowledge with regard to Haiti. Mike in Bailey, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's up?
That gentleman that called earlier about how the women are so fearful about being assigned as conscripted wives, it goes beyond that. Al Jazeera or DW, I can't remember which the interview was on. The Taliban press guy, he confirmed that they were going to respect the women's rights, and it was going to be adhered strictly to what the Quran.
Right, within the context of Sharia law was the phrase that he used.
Yeah, yes. And he also indicated that the government officials in all these different cities and provinces were to report back to work because the Taliban does not know how to administer a government, and they know that. So they are being demanded to come back, and they're indicating you'll be punished, and that kind of means execution, and they will not allow any of the women to report back. Right. So it's really getting compounded. For instance, there was a woman Afghani pilot. You think they are going to give her a chance to get out of that country if they find her?
Yeah, she's not alone. You're talking about the one who was on MSNBC yesterday. She was not alone, Mike. Yeah. I mean, there were a number of women who were trained as pilots. Afghanistan is going to go through this really tough time. Had George W. Bush not decided to lie us into 2 wars, wouldn't be happening, and Iraq will be probably going through an equally difficult time. In the near future. And it's just, we have to look at first causes. This was, Bush lied us into the war, and then Trump surrendered the war to Afghanistan, or to the Taliban. And it's ugly. But, let's keep in mind, women don't have any more rights in Saudi Arabia. They don't have any more rights in the United Arab Emirates. They don't have any more rights in Qatar. I mean, this is what happens when you have theocratic states that say that they are ruling in the name of religion, when you have theocracies. This is what inevitably happens. And frankly, it's what happened here in the United States, in Massachusetts, in the 1700s, where, women could not go out without having their heads covered, and they couldn't go to church unless they were with their husbands, and they couldn't engage in commerce. And that was the American Taliban, and they were called the Puritans. So it's not like this is something that's entirely unique in the history of the world. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 47 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Alvin in Waycross, Georgia. Hey, Alvin, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yes. My question relates to the current news about Afghanistan. Do you believe the current policies of the government will be different or resemble their past policies from 1996 to 2001 when they were in power at that time?
Right. I'm guessing that they will go back to their rigorous suppression of women and of dissent and of anything that resembles democracy. But like I said just a minute ago, in doing that, I'm guessing that they will moderate it slightly. They're looking at our relationship with Saudi Arabia, for example, where women have basically no rights. They can't even drive cars, right? They'll say, well, America deals with the Saudis all the time. That was the first country that Donald Trump visited when he became president. Saudi Arabia has been good buddies with the United States since the late 1800s, whenever they discovered oil. Maybe it was the 1920s or 30s. And we'll just become like Saudi Arabia, except that Saudi Arabia, of course, is a kingdom, it's an inherited rule. But my guess is they're going to try and figure out a way that they can get international recognition, that they can be viewed as not more extreme than the Saudis, and that it may work out for them. They may be able to pull that off. They're not going to become, liberals overnight, Alvin.
And do you believe their policies towards the Hazaras, do you believe those will change, or do you think they will remain the same as before from 1996 to 2001? All of the various religious and ethnic minority groups in Afghanistan are at great risk. And the guy that Donald Trump ordered released from prison back, 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I guess it was, who has declared himself the president of Afghanistan. That guy supervised blowing up those literally ancient, 1,000-year-old statues because they were graven images. That brand of Islam takes very seriously the first commandment, which says, "Thou shalt have no graven images." And therefore, you do not see pictures in their homes. You do not see statues. You don't see anything outside of what is it called when you write things? I'm lacking the word. Anyway, text, basically. The script is what is all over the inside of the mosques. Unlike in Catholicism, where you see pictures of Mary and the saints and all this kind of stuff. So I think they're just going to go back to a fundamentalist, Islamic government, becoming an Islamic state. The question is, are we going to recognize them? Are we going to work with them? Are we going to try to punish them? I'm guessing that there's a heated debate going on right now in both the Taliban and inside the U.S. State Department about what's all this going to look like going forward. And, what is the relationship going to be between these two countries and between the Taliban and the world and the United Nations? And I don't have any early indicators of how any of that is going to shake out right now, Alvin, but I will keep you all apprised. Thanks a lot for the phone call.
It's 51 minutes past the hour. I'll be back in just 1 minute after I read a commercial over on the other side of the show for our commercial listeners. And then we will continue taking your phone calls. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So there's a new study that has, this is not peer-reviewed, but it is in preprint. It is being peer-reviewed as we speak, where the scientists were looking at the ability of the COVID virus to jump from the human species. You know, it started with bats, and then it apparently went to pangolins and then to humans. To jump from humans to other species, which would be a big problem. If we can infect other mammals, you know, our cats and dogs, if we can infect rats or mice who have traditionally been disease vectors for all kinds of things, from the bubonic plague to hantavirus, if we can infect them with this virus, we've got a whole brand new problem. And sure enough, they have found that these two variants, B351 and P1, both can infect mice in the laboratory. And they say this abrogation of the species barrier represents, you know, a serious problem. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Helena in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Helena, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I am so addicted to your show.
Oh, thank you.
Earlier, you've mentioned that in the future we are going to remember Afghanistan as either Biden's failure or the Biden pulling us out of the fire. Well,
and therefore Bush's failure. Yes.
Yes. Well, I'm thinking that instead of waiting, you know, for the future, we need to start preset every report about Afghanistan with not a Biden failure, but with Trump's failure, Trump's disastrous negotiation failure with terrorists.
Yeah, you're singing my song, Helena. You know, I have been putting that out, you know, ever since this began, and I keep amplifying it and going back to the, you know, Trump closing 10 Air Force bases, Trump, you know, yes. Having the head of the Taliban released so that he could negotiate with him, basically surrendering unilaterally. I mean, we got nothing in exchange for this, absolutely nothing.
Yes.
And then Trump didn't have the courage to pull the trigger on this while he was still president to make this happen. He cut the deal and he left it for the next guy, which is the same thing he did with the vaccines. And yes. So I keep saying this, and I'm hoping every now and then, you know, things that my rants kind of bleed into other media. I know that, you know, the producers for at least one show that I know of on television listen to this program, or at least listen to it from time to time.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm hopeful that we can get that message out. But I agree with you, Helena.
And also that, you know, that Biden is doing okay job despite Trump's sellout to Taliban. Yeah. And I don't know what you think about this, but I do believe that this negotiations with the terrorists, bailing out a Taliban terrorist from the Palestinian jail, that was preset.
It was from a Pakistani jail, yes.
Yes, just in case Trump would not win. I believe that Trump and Taliban had some type of agreement in between, you know, those two, because otherwise what happened, how it was negotiated with the Afghanistan government being cut off, then Afghanistan government telling Biden not to start withdrawing people earlier because that would supposedly create a panic, with the Afghanistan government fleeing right in the beginning. it's just bizarre. It's just simply
Well, it's
bizarre.
characteristic of Donald Trump. This is his life. This is his life in business deals. He just jumps into things impulsively. Oh, let's do steaks. Let's do wines. Let's buy a winery. Let's do an airline. Let's do a school. Let's make a game, a board game. I mean, it's like the long list of Trump's failed businesses is much, much longer than any of his ones that were accidentally successful or were successful because of Alan Weisselberg and I'm forgetting the woman's name, but who ran his construction company, who knew what they were doing. And it's just a flaming tragedy that this man became president of the United States for 4 years and screwed up our country and a whole bunch of other countries as well. It's just a flaming tragedy.
And just really, really, really quickly about public schools. We need to put it in reverse, saying that public schools need public policy based on public safety, science, and CDC.
Amen. Amen. Very well said, Helena. Thank you very much for the call. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. Anything Goes Friday. Do we have any guests, Sean, tomorrow? No? Cool. So it's just you and me all day. And 3 hours, we'll see what the news cycle has to bring, and I'll no doubt have a story or three for you. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So please participate. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Bye.